The ground was cold and hard, covered in black dust and broken metal. Kelra opened her eyes slowly, her vision blurry, her head heavy. Smoke filled the air, and the sound of gunfire had stopped. The battle was over, but she was still alive, or at least partly. She tried to move, but a sharp pain shot through her body. When she looked down, her breath caught in her throat. Her legs were gone. There was only blood, smoke, and the torn ends of her battle armor. Her lower body was crushed under rubble, her blood soaking into the soil. She blinked back tears and bit her lip. She was a soldier of the Zalari army, proud, strong, unbreakable, but now she was nothing but a broken piece left behind. She tried to call out, but her voice was dry, her throat full of dust. No one answered, no one came. A few hours passed, maybe more. She had no idea. Her comm device was broken, and her suit's life signal had stopped flashing. She heard footsteps once heavy and fast. She lifted her head with hope, but it was just one of her own kind, a Zalari captain, wounded but walking. He saw her. He looked at her face, then at her body, then turned away. He didn't speak, didn't help. He just vanished into the smoke like a ghost. She was left again alone. The wind picked up, carrying the ash of the dead. Kelra started to shake, not from fear, but from the cold. She couldn't move, couldn't crawl. She was bleeding out slowly, and her body was losing strength. She closed her eyes, whispering an old warrior prayer under her breath. If this is death, let it be quick, let it be quiet. But death didn't come. Instead, she heard something strange. Footsteps, again, but not the same. These were slower, heavier. Then she heard breathing, soft but close. She opened one eye, and what she saw made her freeze. It was a human, dirty, tired, and carrying a large weapon. His armor was scratched, his helmet cracked, but he was alive, and he was walking straight toward her. She tensed, her heart racing. In her world, humans were monsters, smart, brutal, dangerous. She tried to reach for her small blade, but her arm barely moved. She was helpless. If he wanted to end her, she couldn't stop him. He stopped in front of her. Looking down, his face was dirty, but his eyes were clear blue like frozen water. He didn't raise his weapon. He didn't speak. Kelra stared at him, forcing the words out. "Finish it, human. Do it quickly." The human didn't reply. Instead, he dropped his weapon to the side and knelt down beside her. She blinked in confusion, watching him pull something from his bag: bandages, tools, a water pack. What are you doing?" she whispered. He finally spoke, his voice low and tired. "Helping. Why?" She coughed. "I'm your enemy." The human looked at her, wiped some blood off her face. He gave her water, holding it gently to her lips. Then he said 4 words that made her stop breathing. "Because you're still alive." Kelra didn't know what to say. She stared at this man, this enemy, who was now trying to save her. He worked fast, wrapping her wounds, stopping the bleeding. He cut parts of his own jacket to make soft padding under her back. As he worked, she asked again, You don't hate me?" He gave a small smile, tired but kind. "I hate war," he said, "not people." That night, the two of them sat in silence inside a broken wall. The sky above was full of stars, but the air was still full of danger. Kelra felt her body growing cold again, but this time she wasn't alone. The human had made a small fire, hidden under metal plates to avoid drones. He stayed awake, holding his rifle in one hand. Keeping watch, Kelra whispered, almost to herself, "What's your name, human?" He looked over, eyes still alert. "Mason," he said. "Sergeant Mason Hale." She closed her eyes again, not in fear this time, but in strange, quiet safety. For the first time since the war started, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she had a chance to live, and that chance came from the last place she ever expected. The sun had not yet risen, but the darkness was already fading. Kelra opened her eyes slowly, her body aching. Beside her, the fire had burned out, and the human was still sitting guard, Sergeant Mason Hawley hadn't moved much during the night. Only his eyes shifted, watching the shadows for danger. Kelra coughed softly. Her lips were dry, her throat still burning. Mason looked over and handed her the last bit of water from his flask. She drank, then leaned back against the broken wall, still confused. "You could have left me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Zalari." Mason didn't answer right away. He checked his rifle, then checked the makeshift bandages on her legs. "You're a person," he finally said. "That's enough." She studied him carefully. This wasn't the human monster she had been taught about. In her military training, humans were called the silent threat. It was said they never showed mercy, never took prisoners, but now, one was sitting beside her, tired but calm, treating her like a wounded friend. "You don't even know." "My name," she said slowly. Mason glanced at her. "Then tell me." She blinked, surprised, then spoke quietly. "Kelra." "Of Clan Vazari." Mason nodded once. "All right, Kelra." The way he said her name, it didn't sound like hate, it didn't sound like fear, it just sounded real. Kelra looked down at the blood-stained cloth around her legs. There was no pain now, just numbness. Still, she knew she wouldn't survive long without real medical help. "You can't carry me far," she said. "You'll die trying." Mason looked away for a moment, then stood up. He walked toward the ruins of a burnt transport nearby and disappeared into the smoke. Kelra lay still, staring at the broken sky. She thought of her home planet, red skies, green rivers, her mother's voice. Then she remembered the war, the bombs, the sound of her commander's voice telling them to push forward. They said humans were coming and that no mercy would be given, so they gave none in return. Now, the same enemy was trying to keep her alive. It made no sense. But her heart whispered something she didn't want to admit. She trusted him. A sound pulled her thoughts back. It was Mason, returning, dragging a half-broken hover sled he had pulled from the wreck. He smiled a little, sweat running down his forehead. "This might work," he said. "Not perfect, but better than nothing." He carefully lifted her, wrapping her in a thermal blanket. Her body felt like it would fall apart, but his hands were strong and careful. He placed her gently on the hover sled and adjusted the controls. The sled made a soft hum and hovered a few inches off the ground. "Where are we going?" she asked, still weak. "There's a human recon point about 6 kilometers west," he said. "Might be some supplies, maybe a radio." She looked up at him. "You're risking your life for me." Mason didn't stop walking. "I've lost friends," he said quietly. "Some of them were left behind." His voice was heavy, but he didn't look back. "No one should be left like that, not even you." Kelra lay silently as the ruins passed by, the sound of burning metal, distant creatures, and shifting rubble filled the air. Every now and then, Mason would stop, check his rifle, and listen. At one point, they had to hide as a patrol ship flew overhead, scanning for survivors. Mason covered her with scrap metal and held his breath until the ship passed. They kept moving. Finally, near the base of a large rock structure, they found it, a recon pod mostly intact, hidden under vines and cracked trees. Mason opened the panel and smiled. "Power's still good," he said. He activated a small beacon one that would send a weak signal. Maybe someone would hear. It maybe not, but it was better than silence. As the pod hummed, Mason turned to her. "You'll need proper care soon," he said. "I can't fix what's missing." Kelra looked at her legs, or what was left of them. "No one can," she said, her voice steady. "But you didn't let me die." Mason sat beside her, pulling out a ration bar and splitting it in half. They ate in silence, side by side. Not enemies, not soldiers, just two people in the ruins of a war. That night, Kelra looked at the stars and spoke softly. "Thank you, Mason." He didn't reply, but she saw the way his shoulders relaxed. Maybe, just maybe, there was still something good left in this broken galaxy, and it had found her when she thought all hope was gone. The next morning, the wind changed. It brought the scent of oil, smoke, And something worse movement. Mason stood at the edge of the old recon pod, eyes watching the horizon. Kalra lay inside, her body weak but alert. She could feel it too. Something was coming. What is it? She asked softly. Mason didn't turn around. Drones, he said. Search drones. They scan for life signs. Her eyes widened. If they find us, they'll call it an airstrike, he nodded, already packing supplies. The recon pod was no longer safe. They had to move now. Mason lifted her onto the hover sled again. He adjusted the controls and started pushing it through the broken trees. The forest was thick with metal and bone wreckage from the battle. The sun burned orange above them, casting long shadows. On the ground, suddenly, a sound came from behind, a loud humming, followed by flashing red light. A drone had spotted them. Go! Kalra cried. They'll fire in seconds. Mason didn't need to be told. He pushed the sled faster, even as the ground shook beneath them, behind them. The drone began to charge its weapons. The trees exploded in fire and heat. Mason ducked and rolled, shielding Kalra's body with his own. Flames licked their backs, but he kept moving. One shot hit the ground beside them, throwing sparks and rock into the air. I see an old ship. Kalra yelled, pointing with her good arm, to the right. Mason turned sharply, dragging the sled behind him. Through falling branches and broken armor pieces, they reached a half-buried cargo ship. Its metal hull was cracked, but the entry hatch was still open. Inside was dark and quiet. Mason pulled Kalra in and sealed the hatch behind them. Outside, the drone scanned the area for a few minutes, then moved on. The two were safe at least for now inside. The ship smelled of rust and death. Bodies lay in the corners, both human and Zellari. Kalra looked around and whispered, This was a supply ship, Mason nodded. Looking for anything useful, he found a small med kit, half-used but with a few important tools. He also found a solar battery and a small heater. He set it up in a corner and helped Kalra rest against the wall. She was shivering, her skin pale. The heat helped, but not enough. Mason cleaned her wounds again, this time using proper antiseptic. Kalra winced but didn't complain. Her voice was weak but steady. You didn't have to save me. Not again. Mason sighed. You're right, she blinked, surprised by his words. I didn't have to, he said, looking into her eyes. But I wanted to. Silence filled the space between them. Outside, fire still burned in the trees. But inside, something warmer began to grow. Trust, maybe, or something deeper. Kalra closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. You're not like the others, she said. Most humans I met in war, they didn't talk. They just shot. Mason leaned back against the wall, his voice soft. Most of us don't want this war. She nodded slowly. Same on our side. He gave her a tired smile. Then why are we still fighting? Kalra looked away. Because the people in charge don't bleed. The ship creaked above them as the wind blew harder. Mason stood and checked the power console. It still had emergency energy, just enough to activate a signal jammer. He switched it on, hiding them from enemy scans for a little while longer. They sat together in the quiet for hours, sharing stories in broken words and long silences. Kalra spoke of her home world of glowing lakes and crystal trees. Mason told her about Earth, about music, cities, and oceans. Do you have family? She asked. He nodded. A younger sister back on Earth. You? Kalra shook her head. My people thought emotion made us weak, she whispered. But right now, I'm glad you care. Mason looked at her and said, caring isn't weakness. It's what makes us different from machines. The fire outside faded slowly as night came again. Inside the cargo ship, surrounded by ghosts of war, a human and an alien shared food, silence, and something new. A fragile bond, born in fire and held together by choice, not duty. A soft beep echoed inside the old cargo ship. Mason moved quickly to the console, wiping off the dust. The emergency signal receiver had picked something up. A voice came through, broken, but clear enough. Sergeant Mason Hawley, This is command. We've received your beacon signal. Recon team in your sector. Extraction in 12 hours. Mason took a deep breath. Help was finally coming. But then the voice added something more. Do not bring enemy survivors. Command protocol is clear. Any injured enemy must be left behind. Kalra heard it too. She turned her head slowly toward Mason, her face calm but tired. You have to go, she said. You heard them. Mason didn't answer. He turned the radio off and sat down beside her. He looked at the dirt floor, at her pale skin, at the weak way her body rested against the wall. I'm not leaving you, he said. You must, she replied quietly. They'll punish you if you don't. I don't care, Mason said, louder this time. You're not just some enemy to me. Kalra gave a small smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. But I am, she said. You're risking your life for someone you were trained to kill. Mason stood and started pacing the room. He hated this rule, this war, this broken logic that said saving a life was wrong. He had seen too many friends die, too many times where no one came to help. Now, he had a choice, and he already knew what it would be. I'll tell them I found a high-value target, he said. I'll lie if I have to. Kalra looked shocked. You would lie to your own command, for me? Mason nodded. You're not just a soldier, Kalra. You're a person. You're brave. And you didn't give up even when everyone left you. I won't be one more person who leaves you behind. Kalra's eyes filled with tears. Her people believed crying was weakness. But right now, she didn't care. Her chest hurt from how much emotion she held inside. And now, this human, this enemy, was breaking every rule to save her. Suddenly, a loud crack came from outside. Mason rushed to the small window. A patrol group, 3 soldiers in human armor, scanning the area with lights. If they found Kalra, they would shoot first and ask questions later. Mason turned to her. We have to move now. Move where? She asked. There's an old Zilari tunnel system just 2 clicks east, he said. You said your people built emergency paths underground, right? Kalra nodded slowly. I can guide you if we reach the first pillar. There's a hatch hidden under stone. Mason packed quickly. Lifting Kalra back onto the hover sled, he wrapped her in a blanket and adjusted the metal cover. Then he pushed the sled through the cargo hatch and into the cold, quiet forest. They moved silently, only the soft hum of the sled floating through the shadows. Lights from the patrol team passed nearby, but didn't spot them. Mason didn't. His eyes scanned, his ears listened, and his steps were light. After a long walk, Kalra lifted her hand. Here, she said, pointing at a half-buried stone pillar covered in moss. Mason cleared it quickly, revealing an old control pad. She pressed her finger against it, and the ground shifted with a soft click. A hatch opened, leading down into darkness. Mason helped her into the tunnel, then closed the hatch behind them. It was cold, damp, and silent. This tunnel leads to a forgotten outpost, Kalra said. There's power there. And maybe weapons, maybe comms. They moved through the tunnel, the light from Mason's shoulder lamp guiding them. Old walls showed Zilari writing and warnings, but they kept going, step by step, until they reached the door. It opened with a slow hiss, and they entered the dusty room. A table, some old supplies, and a terminal that still glowed dim blue. Mason sat her down gently and walked to the terminal. He typed in some commands and found what he needed. A nearby landing zone just outside the tunnel exit. Perfect for a stealth extraction. He turned to Kalra and said, I'll tell them you're a critical prisoner with intel. She raised an eyebrow. Do I look like I have intel? He smiled. You do now. She laughed softly, and for a moment, the pain and fear faded. Mason sat beside her, and they shared a ration bar in silence. Time was short, but hope was alive. In 12 hours, either they'd be free or they'd face command together. But one thing was certain, Mason had made his choice, and Kalra no longer felt abandoned. A small hidden outpost felt like a breath between storms. The power hummed quietly through old Zilari machines. Calra rested on a flat bench, her body weak but more stable now. Mason moved quietly around the room, gathering tools, checking maps, and watching the time. Only 8 hours left until extraction. 8 hours to move Calra to the pickup zone. 8 hours to stay hidden from patrols that would kill her on sight. Suddenly, the soft alarm buzzed from the tunnel wall. Mason rushed to check the display. A small camera showed movement above 3 soldiers, human, heavily armed. They were scanning the forest, walking straight toward the hidden hatch. Calra saw the screen too. Her face went pale. "If they find us, they won't ask questions," she whispered. Mason looked at her, then at his rifle, then at the exit tunnel. "We're not staying here," he said. "We move now, but I slow you down," she said. "You know that." "I don't care," he replied, lifting her carefully onto the sled. "I didn't come this far to leave you now." They entered the back tunnel, narrow, full of dust and cobwebs. Mason's shoulder light guided them through the dark. The tunnel curved upward and opened near a ridge where the pickup was planned. But just as they stepped out into the clearing, they heard voices, movement down. "There!" a soldier shouted. Flashlights and red laser sights pointed toward the trees. The human patrol had followed them somehow. Mason pushed the sled behind a broken log and held his rifle up. Calra reached for the small alien pistol Mason had given her earlier. Her hands shook, but her aim was steady. "If they get close, we shoot," she whispered. The soldiers drew closer, moving slowly, scanning everything. One of them stepped only meters away from Mason's hiding spot. He held his breath, finger on the trigger, but then a sound came from behind the patrol, another drone. It buzzed above, scanning the area, and flew off again. The soldiers turned to follow it, thinking it had seen something. "Now," Calra said, "let's go before they come back." They climbed higher, using rocks and shadows to stay hidden. The path was steep, and Mason had to carry her on his back for part of it, her arms wrapped around his neck, her voice quiet in his ear. "You're breathing hard," she said with a small smile. He grunted. "Carrying a warrior is harder than it looks." Despite the fear, she laughed softly. For a moment, it felt normal-like. The war didn't exist. They finally reached the ridge where the extraction point was marked. It was a wide clearing with an old landing pad, half buried in vines. Mason checked his watch, 6 hours left. He set up a small power beacon to help guide the shuttle. But it could only be turned on for a short time, too long, and enemies would find it first. They sat in silence, hidden under a camo sheet. Calra looked at the stars and whispered, "I never thought I'd see another sunrise." Mason sat beside her, his hands dirty, eyes tired. "You'll see many more," he said. "Once we're off this rock." She looked at him seriously. "What happens after? What will they do to me?" Mason paused, then said, "I don't know. But I'll be there, even if they call me a traitor." She asked, "Even then?" He said without hesitation. Suddenly, a noise behind them. Footsteps, fast and sharp. The patrol had returned. This time from the side. They spotted the camo sheet and raised weapons. "Freeze!" One of them shouted. "Step out now." Mason stood, hands up. "Don't shoot." He shouted, "I'm Sergeant Halle from Recon Delta." The soldier stepped closer. "What's under the sheet?" "Wounded prisoner," Mason said quickly. "Zalari survivor. She has valuable intel." Another soldier pulled the sheet back, revealing Calra, weak but alert. She stared at them without fear. The soldiers looked confused. "Why isn't she cuffed?" One asked, "Why is she patched up?" Mason replied coldly, "She's been helping me survive in enemy territory. She wants to talk to command, give us a ride, and let the brass decide." There was silence. Then the lead soldier nodded slowly. "We'll report at shuttles. Arriving in 5. As they waited, no one spoke. Calra's hand slipped into Mason's without a word. He didn't pull away when the shuttle finally arrived. Its doors opened with a hiss, and for the first time in days, Calra was lifted into a warm, safe place, not as an enemy, but as someone who mattered. The shuttle doors closed with a loud hiss. The engines hummed softly, lifting them off the broken planet. Mason sat on the floor beside Kalra, still holding her hand. She was pale, weak, but alive. A human medic walked over and checked her. "Condition: she's lost a lot of blood," he said. "She needs real treatment fast." Mason nodded. "How long to base?" 30 minutes, the pilot answered from the front. "Tell command we have a guest," Mason said firmly, "and keep that part quiet for now." Kalra opened her eyes and looked around the small cabin. She saw human soldiers watching her carefully, some with curiosity, some with cold eyes. She felt like a prisoner, but Mason stayed by her side. "Will they hurt me?" she asked softly. Mason shook his head. "Not while I'm here." The shuttle landed on a large metal platform floating above the clouds. It was a human base in the sky, a hidden fortress known as Skybridge. Built for emergency use, it had everything from weapons to medical units, but it also had strict rules. As the ramp lowered, officers walked out to greet them. One man stepped forward. Tall and sharp-eyed Commander Arlen. He looked at Mason, then at Kalra, his jaw tight. "Sergeant Halle," he said, "you've caused a storm." "I made a choice," Mason replied calmly. "She's not just a wounded enemy, she helped me survive, and she has information." Arlen narrowed his eyes. "She's a Zalari, Halle, and she's still breathing," Mason said. "That should mean something." The commander looked at Kalra, then signaled 2 guards. "Take her to medical bay under watch." Kalra didn't resist. 2 soldiers lifted her gently onto a gurney and wheeled her away. Mason followed, but Arlen grabbed his arm. "You've got explaining to do, soldier." Mason stood tall. "Then let's talk." Inside the medical bay, Kalra lay still while doctors checked her vitals. They used scanners and soft lights, speaking in quiet voices. One nurse looked at her kindly, offering her water. It was the first kind look Kalra received from anyone other than Mason. She whispered, "Thank you." The nurse smiled, surprised. "You speak well. I listen well," Kalra replied, then closed her eyes, resting for the first time without fear. Meanwhile, in a private room, Mason stood in front of a board of officers. They asked questions about the rescue, the risks, the reasons. Mason answered them all with honesty. "She was left to die," he said. "I couldn't do the same." "But she's the enemy," one officer said. "No," Mason replied. "She's proof that not all enemies are monsters." After the meeting, Mason walked back to the med bay. He wasn't sure what would happen next. Court-martial, maybe worse. But when he reached the room, Kalra was sitting up, her body still weak, but her eyes full of life. "I heard you spoke for me," she said. "You didn't have to." Mason sat beside her. "I wanted to. I owe you everything," she whispered. He shook his head. "You owe me nothing." Just then, Commander Arlen entered the room. He looked at both of them in silence, then said, "Command has decided." Mason stood up, ready to fight if needed. But Arlen raised a hand. "She stays for now," he said, "as a protected asset under your care, Halle." Mason blinked, surprised. "You're serious?" Arlen nodded. "She's not going back to a cage, but she doesn't walk free either." Kalra looked at him. "And if I cooperate?" "Then maybe," Arlen said slowly. "You won't be our enemy anymore." After he left, Kalra looked at Mason with quiet hope. "I'm not just a body now," she said. "I'm a person again." Mason smiled. "You always were." Outside the window, the sky was clear, the stars shining bright. For the first time in her life, Kalra saw peace, not just in the sky, but in the eyes of the man who refused to let her die. She was no longer a forgotten soldier. She was no longer broken and alone. She had been saved, and the war inside her heart had begun to fade. 2 weeks passed on the Skybridge. Kalra stayed in the medical bay, surrounded by human doctors and machines. She had never seen such quiet care before. No shouting, no orders, just gentle hands and soft lights. Her body was healing slowly, but her legs were gone forever. Still, she didn't feel broken anymore. Not with Mason visiting her every day, not with the warm food, the clean sheets. and the silence that didn't carry the sound of war. One morning, a doctor came to her bed. "With a tablet in hand, we have something for you," he said, smiling. Calra looked confused. "What is it?" "Cybernetic legs," the doctor said. "We built them with parts from your people's tech and ours. They're strong, fast, and connected directly to your nerves." She blinked, unsure how to feel. She had accepted that she would never walk again. Now these humans were offering to help her stand, not just as a survivor, but as someone who belonged. "Why would you give this to me?" she asked softly. "I'm not one of you." The doctor smiled again. "You are now." The surgery was done the next day. It took hours, but when Calra woke up, the first thing she saw were her new legs, metal, smooth, beautiful in their own way. Mason stood nearby, arms crossed, trying not to smile too much. "How do they feel?" he asked. Calra moved her toes, then her knees. "I feel whole again," she said, voice shaking. With help from the nurse, she stood up slowly. Her balance was shaky, but strong. Mason walked beside her as she took her first step since the battlefield. Each step felt like thunder inside her chest. She was walking, she was alive, and she was not alone. Later that day, Commander Arlen called for her. A small room was prepared with a few high-ranking officers seated behind a glass wall. Calra walked in, standing tall with her new legs, wearing a clean uniform made just for her. Mason sat beside her, wearing his full gear, but his hand rested on hers under the table. Arlen spoke first. "Calra, of Clan Vasari," he said, "you were the enemy, a soldier in war. But you were also saved, protected, and now stand here in peace." She nodded, calm and brave. "I was ready to die," she said, her voice clear. "But one human changed that, and because of him, I now believe we are not so different. Will you help us?" Another officer asked. "Will you speak to your people, bring peace instead of fire?" Calra looked down, thinking of her home, her commanders, her past. Then she looked at Mason, the one who gave her a new future. "I will try," she said. "I can't promise they'll listen, but I'll speak with truth." The room went silent. Then Arlen stood and extended his hand. "Then you are not a prisoner," he said. "You are now a peace envoy." The words felt like stars inside her chest. She had no tribe, no army, no planet nearby. But now, she had a purpose. A week later, a small ceremony was held. Only a few officers and soldiers were present, but it was quiet and beautiful. Calra wore a silver badge, the symbol of peace. Mason stood beside her, now her official guardian and partner in the mission. As the anthem of Earth played softly in the background, Calra looked out the window. She saw the stars, the ships, the lights of 1,000 futures waiting to be born. She whispered to Mason, "Do you think they'll accept me?" He smiled. "You're stronger than most people I've ever met. If anyone can bring change, it's you." She nodded, and this time her smile was real, wide and full of hope. The girl who was once left to die, legless and alone now, walked beside the very people she once fought, not as a weapon, not as a prisoner, but as a bridge between two worlds. And the man who refused to pull the trigger, he didn't just save a life, he helped change the course of history.